After my husband died, I thought grief would be the hardest thing to survive. I was wrong. At the reading of his will, my children laughed, actually laughed, while I sat there clutching the last thing he'd left me, a small wooden box. They got $22 million, 2 luxury cars, and our beach house in Charleston. I got a box. They called it sentimental trash. But when I opened it that night, there was a single brass key inside and a note in his handwriting, "Trust what they mock." My hands shook as I realized it wasn't just a key. It was a message, something my husband had hidden, maybe from them, maybe for me. And when I finally turned that key, what I found made every cruel laugh disappear from my mind forever. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reaches. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If stories like mine touch something in you, please subscribe and stay. Every week we share true stories about strength, family, and the quiet revenge of those who were once silenced. I'm Marin Aldridge, and this is my truth. St. John the Baptist Cathedral was too bright for grief. Color spilled through the stained glass and shattered over the marble like confetti, turning the aisle into a carnival my heart couldn't recognize. I sat in the front pew, hands folded so tightly, my knuckles matched the stone, and tried to breathe through the perfume of lilies. Behind me, my children whispered. Jet's chuckle cut the silence first, then Brielle's thin, delighted giggle. 2 notes I knew too well from a lifetime of wanting more. Harlan would have hated that sound in a sacred place. "You will not be alone," he had told me in the last week, his palm warm over mine, "but trust the silence." The priest finished. The organ dimmed. People filed past with murmured condolences. Then the voices I dreaded called my name, Arthur Whitcomb. Harlan's lawyer asking us to step into a side room paneled in dark wood that held the kind of quiet a man keeps for bad news. Arthur unfolded the will and read in a dry, respectful voice that made every syllable land like a gavel. To Jet and Brielle, $22 million, 2 sports cars, and the Charleston property. The room seemed to tilt. Brielle sucked in a happy breath. Jet grinned at our reflections in the glass cabinet like a boy who'd just been handed the keys to summer. And to my wife, Marin, I leave this box. The pause was audible. Arthur set a small velvet-wrapped parcel in my hands. For a beat, the air didn't move. Then Brielle laughed outright, a sound too sharp for the size of the room. "Maybe Dad thought you didn't need money, Mother." Jet didn't bother to hide his smile. I held the weight of it, said nothing, and let their joy echo off the paneled walls until it embarrassed itself. Back at the Aldridge house, the one Harlan and I restored board by board, the one where paint still holds the memory of our fingerprints, I carried the box to his desk. The late light pooled on the surface where he'd kept ledgers in neat stacks, where his cufflinks still waited in a small ceramic dish. My hands were steady when I unwrapped the velvet. The lid resisted as if it knew what it was protecting me from, then gave with a soft sigh. Inside there was no ring, no letter of apology, no stack of bills to spare me humiliation. Only a small brass key warm from the velvet, the number 3B etched along its stem, and a slip of paper in his precise hand, First Coastal Bank, Bull Street. I turned the key over and over, feeling the familiar ridge of his logic hiding under the metal. Harlan knew our children. He knew what laughter sounded like when it mistook itself for victory. The box wasn't consolation. It was an instruction. At the window, evening combed gold across the table where he'd done the family books. Shame rose hot and unsummoned, but behind it something steadier lifted its chin. This wasn't the end. It was a door waiting for the right key. Morning came with a soft, stubborn rain that made Bull Street shine like onyx. I parked under a magnolia and walked to First Coastal Bank with the key tucked in my palm, as if my skin might forget it if I let go. Marble floors clicked under my heels. The lobby was old Savannah brass railings, high ceilings a clock that had been scolding people for being late longer than I'd been alive. At the counter, a teller with watchful eyes examined the key, nodded once, and led me down a quiet hall to a private room where the temperature dropped and sound bent in on itself. She disappeared into the vault, the door side shut behind her. When she returned, she set a long, narrow metal box on the table and left me alone with it, as if it were a person I needed to speak to. Keys turn with a particular kind of honesty. They either fit or they don't. Mine fit. The lid lifted to reveal a thick, leather-bound journal and a stack of files tied with twine, tight enough to suggest a man who didn't trust accidents. A single envelope lay on top, Harlan's name, steady as a heartbeat across the front. I opened it with the fear of a woman who has already lost the worst and still expects the world to ask for more. If they laugh at you, let them, the letter began. What they take is a rope they wind around their own throats. When they pull, it will tighten. Everything real, our shares, bonds, and properties sits in trusts in your name. I had to show their hearts before I showed the truth. The room pressed closer. Rain ticked at the window like a second hand. I slid the letter aside and untied the twine. The first file was a map of our life as Harlan had truly built it. Deeds to parcels I'd never visited but recognized by county valuation statements. Brokerage summaries with figures that seemed to add zeros as I read. There were accounts seamed across companies, quiet holdings and developments he'd shepherded from dirt to skyline, and transfer documents that placed control cleanly, legally, and visibly in my hands. The total, by my quick math and slower disbelief, exceeded $40 million. My fingers trembled, and not from greed. Grief can be a promise kept. This was a promise fulfilled. Harlan had not given our children a windfall. He had given them a test. He had not given me scraps. He had given me a task. Beneath the files, the journal. The leather had the softened feel of something handled every night. I opened to the first entry, the ink dark and unhurried. I did not make 2 wills to divide love, he'd written. I made 2 paths so truth could walk where love refused. If they honor you, they keep what they've been given. If they turn, the weight they carry will be their own. It wasn't cruelty. It was architecture, the kind Harlan loved, where the load distributes itself according to the laws it can't see. I read until the words blurred, until his voice in my head slowed to a quiet I could put in my pocket. Then I set the journal back in the box, retied the files, and locked everything away again. The teller reappeared when I pressed the bell, and together we performed the small ritual of confirming closure, of making secrets official. The rain had eased to a drizzle by the time I reached the car. Savannah smelled like wet stone and magnolia. The key was heavier now, not with metal, but with what it had turned. At home, the Alderidge house met me with creaks I could read like a diary. I carried the files to our bedroom and slid open the top drawer of the old oak dresser, where I'd kept wedding keepsakes, pressed gardenias, a napkin from our first dinner, the ribbon from my bouquet. I lifted them carefully and tucked the journal and documents beneath, arranging the past over the future like a blessing or a veil. Then I closed the drawer, smoothed the wood with my palm, and stood very still. Harlan hadn't given me a keepsake. He'd handed me a roll. The box at the will was a stage prop for those who needed to see me small. The brass key was the real script. There were 2 wills now, one the world could point to while it laughed, and one that waited in a cold room for the person he trusted to come for it. I thought of Jet's grin of Brielle's bright earrings catching light as she smirked, and the sentence from the letter slid back through me like spine. What they take is a rope. I had spent a lifetime softening my edges for love. In the quiet of our house, with rain still whispering on the glass, I felt my edges find themselves again. The door had opened. I knew with a certainty that sat clean and square in my chest, this was not a story about what I didn't get. It was a story about what I'd been asked to do. Brielle's voice came through the phone, sugar-coated soft as a lullaby. "Mother, we're having dinner tomorrow night. To remember Father, you should come." Her tone lingered just long enough for me to hear the edge underneath. I could almost see her smile, that careful curve she used when she wanted something. I agreed, though I already knew the evening would taste more like venom than wine. The next night, the Alderidge dining room was glowing under its old chandeliers. Harlan's portrait hung at the center wall, his painted eyes calm and amused, as though watching the show about to begin. The table gleamed with silver candles reflected on the glass, and jazz whispered from the speakers like it was trying not to listen. Jet stood by the bar, spinning a wine bottle in his palm. Brielle floated between the table and the mirror, her dress too bright for grief. "Mother," she sang when she saw me, "you look—" "Well, sit, please. We've opened Father's favorite Merlot." I took the chair nearest the portrait. The scent of the wine was heavy, sweet and strange against the chill in the room. Jet raised his glass, his grin careless. "Guess what, Mother? I bought a yacht." "Father really did take care of us, huh?" Brielle laughed, clinking her glass against his. "I'm looking at a place in Florida. Something with ocean views and no ghosts." Her eyes flicked toward me. "You should think about downsizing. That house must be lonely now. There's a lovely retirement villa near Beaufort you'd fit right in." The air in my chest turned to stone. I smoothed the napkin in my lap, forced my voice to stay even. "This house was built by your father and me. Every wall has his hands in it. I'm not leaving." The silence that followed had teeth. Jet slammed his glass down so hard the stem cracked and snapped. Wine spilled across the table like blood blooming in water. "You're always living in the past," he said, his voice shaking with a fury he mistook for strength. "Father's gone. Let it go." I stood, feeling the eyes of both my children track me as I walked out. In the hallway, the air was cooler, quieter. Behind me, Brielle's voice cut through the clatter of dishes. Maybe he left her something we don't know about. That was when I knew the real dinner had only just begun. Back in Harlan's study, I opened the desk drawer and drew out his journal. The page I'd left marked with a ribbon waited for me. His handwriting was steady, the ink a calm whisper. "Real inheritance isn't money. It's how you use it when others betray you." I sat there for a long time, the laughter from the dining room seeping through the walls like smoke. The humiliation I'd swallowed earlier shifted, hardened, and found its purpose. Harlan had never meant for me to be the quiet widow. He'd meant for me to be the keeper of the gate, the one who knows when the wolves are coming and when to let them think the door is still open. That night, I didn't cry. I turned off every light except the one above his portrait, and I whispered, "It begins." The house had its own heartbeat now, uneven, hollow, echoing between the rooms. Since Harlan's death, no one spoke here unless it was to wound. The laughter that used to fill this place existed only in memory, like a sound trapped behind glass. Some nights, I thought I could still hear him humming down the hall the way he used to when checking locks before bed. Now the only sound was the tick of the clock above the kitchen doorway, counting the moments until something broke. That evening, rain licked the windows, slow and steady. I was washing a single cup when a soft knock came at the door. When I opened it, Rowan stood there, my grandson. Taller than the last time I'd seen him, his hair damp from the drizzle, his eyes uncertain. "Grandma," he said quietly, "can I come in?" He smelled of cold air and worry. I poured him tea, the steam rising between us like a fragile curtain. "They're fighting again," he murmured, fingers tight around the mug. "Dad and Aunt Brielle. About you. About money." I said nothing. "They think you're losing it," he added, his voice breaking on the words. "Dad said if the court says you can't handle things, the assets can be transferred." The teacup stopped halfway to my lips. I set it down gently. He said that he nodded and pulled out his phone. I recorded them. His thumb trembled as he pressed play. Jet's voice came through sharp and sure. If the court declares her incompetent, it's over. We'll have control in a month." Brielle's laughter followed. "She won't even fight. She's too weak. One signature, and it's done." The recording ended. The room was suddenly too quiet. I looked at my grandson who couldn't meet my eyes. The pain that rose inside me wasn't hot. It was cold and deliberate, the kind that burns slow. They planned to take everything I said softly. Rowan nodded. "They think you'll never see it coming." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "Then let's make sure they do." He blinked at me. "What do you mean?" I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "We'll let them think they're right, that I'm fragile, fading, confused. Let them underestimate me the way they always have." He hesitated, then nodded, a quiet resolve settling over his young face. "I can help you. I want to." That was the first moment I saw Harlan's eyes. In him, not the color, but the steady patience, the unwillingness to turn away from truth, even when it hurt. We spent that night sorting through Harlan's papers. I pulled the hidden box from beneath the scarves in my dresser, and together we examined each document, each page of his journal. Rowan listened intently, asking questions that made me realize how deeply he understood the stakes. "Grandma," he said, flipping through a ledger, "why didn't you tell them about all this? About what he really left you, because it wasn't theirs to know," I said. "And because Harlan didn't want them to be tested by money. He wanted them to be tested by choice." He frowned, "And they failed." I nodded. "Yes. But the test isn't over." When he left for bed, I stayed in the kitchen, the rain now steady on the roof. I looked at the photographs on the wall, family portraits that felt like lies now. Harlan's arm around me. Jet's perfect smile. Brielle's tilted head, all posed, all practiced. I thought of the recording again of their words. "She's too weak." Maybe once that was true. Not anymore. The next morning, I moved through the house quietly, letting my hands remember where everything was, how the floors creaked, how the windows stuck in humidity. If my children wanted to play power games, I would use the same stage they'd built. They would see the mother they believed was blind. They would see the widow they thought was harmless. And when the time came, they would learn who taught them to play. That night, Rowan returned with a small notebook. For notes, he said simply, "So we don't forget anything." I smiled at the gesture, a warmth I hadn't felt in months blooming in my chest. "Good," I said, "because from now on, we remember everything." The house felt different after that, as if it too knew the tide had shifted. The laughter that once haunted the walls was gone. In its place, there was purpose. Rowan slept in the guest room down the hall. I stayed up listening to the rain fade, the ticking clock steady, and the echo of Harlan's words turning like gears in my mind. "If they betray you, trust yourself." For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel alone. I felt ready. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the desk in Harlan's study, the lamp throwing light over the journal's open pages, and wrote one sentence beneath his final line. "The legacy stands. I will guard it until it reveals them for who they are." Arthur Whitcomb's office smelled of cedar and old paper, the kind of scent that reminded me of Harlan's study, the same stillness, the same quiet authority. Outside, rain slid down the tall windows, distorting the trees of Forsyth Park into wavering shadows. The grandfather clock in the corner marked time with its patient pendulum, each swing echoing in my chest, like the beat of something returning to life. Arthur poured tea, but didn't speak. His silence was different today, heavier, deliberate. When I finally met his eyes, he opened a drawer and drew out an envelope sealed with red wax. "He left this for you," he said softly. It was labeled, "For Marin, if they turn against her." The words felt like prophecy. I took the envelope, the wax cracking as I broke the seal. Inside, the paper was thin, nearly translucent. The ink faint, but still unmistakably Harlan's. If they turn on you, Clause 9 of the trust will activate. The $22 million they received is not a gift, but an illusion, a constructed loan secured against their own names. Each cent carries taxes, penalties, and obligations. Should they ever file against you, the trust will revert, and they will bear the full weight of what they sought to steal. Do nothing. Let the law serve as my witness. Their downfall will be their doing, not yours. I read it twice then, a third time. The rain outside deepened a steady rhythm against the glass. The room dimmed until only the amber glow of the lamp cut through the gray. Arthur watched me closely. He knew what they were capable of, he said, and he knew what it would cost you to watch it happen. I placed the letter on the desk, smoothing the edges with my fingertips. He built a trap. Arthur nodded. He built a mirror. He wanted their choices to reflect who they truly are. I looked out the window at the blurred city dissolving in rain. For a long time, I didn't speak. And if they actually go through with it, Arthur's answer came calm and sure. Then you don't lift a finger. The trust executes automatically. The law doesn't need your permission. It only needs their greed. His words settled in me like cold iron. It wasn't revenge. It was consequence. When I finally left, the rain had slowed but hadn't stopped. I stood beneath the awning of the building, the city glistening around me. Savannah in the rain had always been beautiful in a haunted way, like memory refusing to fade. I clutched the letter inside my coat, feeling the thin paper through the fabric, and realized that Harlan's hand was still guiding mine. Driving home, the streets shimmered with puddles, reflecting streetlights like shards of gold. In the rearview mirror, I saw the faintest ghost of my own reflection, half widow, half architect of something larger than grief. I whispered to it, almost as if to him, "If greed is fire, I'll let them light their own match." When I reached the house, Rowan was waiting in the kitchen pouring over Harlan's journal. He looked up, worry flickering across his young face. "What did Arthur say?" I handed him the letter. "Your grandfather left one last design, and it's already in motion." He read quietly, eyes widening as he pieced together what it meant. "So if they sue you, they lose everything." "Not by my hand," I said, "by their own." He leaned back, thoughtful. "Grandpa really planned for every move." "No," I said softly. "He planned for every weakness." That night, when the rain finally stopped, I stood by the window and watched lightning flash over the magnolias. In that brief, bright light, I thought I saw Harlan's reflection beside mine. For the first time since his death, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. People say the greedy always listen hardest to the words not meant for them. I tested that theory over tea. It was late afternoon, the storm from the night before still lingering in the air, thunder rolling low like a promise. Brielle had come by to check on me, dressed in her usual performance of concern. She sat across from me, stirring her tea more than drinking it, eyes darting between the family portrait on the wall and the envelope on the table beside me. "Mother," she said finally, her tone coated in honey, "you've been sorting through Father's things, haven't you? You must have found documents, perhaps. He always hid papers everywhere." I smiled faintly. "There's an old box in the attic," I said, pretending to think. "Probably just blueprints and tax records. Your father never threw anything away." She tilted her head. "I'll take a look sometime." "Of course," I said, my voice steady. "You know where the ladder is." That night, I left the lights off and waited in the dark hallway. The house creaked the way it always did before rain, old wood shifting ghosts stretching in their sleep. Then came the faint click of the back door. A whisper. Footsteps. I stayed in the shadows at the top of the stairs as light from a flashlight slid across the ceiling. Up there, Brielle hissed. "Check the left side. He always hid things under the insulation." Jet grunted in reply. Boxes scraped against the floorboards. Dust rose in the air, visible even in the thin beam of their light. I watched as they found it, the worn cardboard box I'd placed there that morning, sealed with brittle tape and marked H.A. Private. Brielle's voice trembled with triumph. This must be it. They dragged it down the ladder together, too eager to notice the fine layer of dust I'd deliberately brushed across the top. They didn't know that inside were nothing but receipts, repair bills, and a few expired insurance forms. Nothing valuable. Nothing but evidence of their own trespass. I stayed silent until their footsteps faded. Then I closed the attic door behind them, the latch clicking like the final period at the end of a long sentence. At dawn, the phone rang. Arthur's voice carried both gravity and a trace of inevitability. They filed it, Marin, a petition to declare you legally incompetent. I exhaled slowly, feeling the house exhale with me. Then the clause has begun, I said. You understand what that means, he said gently. I do. When I hung up, I found Rowan in the hallway, his hair still messy from sleep. He looked at me, searching my face. It's happening, isn't it? Yes, I said, and it needs to. He hesitated. It feels wrong. They're your children. I know, I said quietly, but sometimes a mother's job isn't to protect her children from falling. It's to let them fall far enough to understand the ground. We walked together to the attic. I opened the window to let the morning air in. The storm had passed, but the sky still carried its bruised color. The magnolias outside swayed gently, their petals scattered across the wet lawn. Rowan stood beside me. What will you do now? Nothing, I said. Just wait. The trust will do what it was built to do. Below us, the house felt alive again, filled not with sorrow, but with purpose. I closed the attic door and locked it. The scent of dust and old wood lingered on my hands as I whispered almost to myself, they think they're hunting treasure, but the only thing they'll find is themselves. That evening, as the sun sank behind the magnolia trees, the house went still. Somewhere in Savannah, my children were celebrating their cleverness, certain they had won. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat beneath Harlan's portrait. His painted eyes looked down at me, calm, knowing. They've started the fire, I told him softly. Now let it burn. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall again, tapping gently against the windows, like the beginning of applause. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish, and paper, a mix of age and order that made everything feel colder. The wooden walls rose high around us, catching every whisper, every breath. Sunlight poured through narrow windows, harsh and white, cutting straight down to the witness bench. Outside, Savannah was heavy with summer heat, but inside the air barely moved. I sat beside Arthur, my hands folded in my lap, staring at the two people who had once been my whole life, my children. Now they sat across from me, flanked by lawyers pretending this was justice. I'd thought grief was the worst thing a mother could feel. I was wrong. Watching your own children build a case to prove you unfit, there are no words for that kind of hollow. When the clerk called my name, I rose. My voice when it came was calm. I never imagined I'd stand in the same courtroom as my own children with them on the other side. Brielle's attorney was first to speak. Your Honor, he began smoothly. My clients believe Mrs. Aldridge is no longer capable of managing her late husband's estate. There is evidence she has withheld financial assets that rightfully belong to the heirs. I didn't interrupt. I didn't look at him. I looked at Jet, who met my gaze for a moment before turning away, his jaw tight. Brielle stared down at her nails, pretending detachment, though her shoulders betrayed the tension she couldn't hide. Arthur stood next, moving with the deliberate patience of a man who knew timing mattered more than volume. He placed a thick folder on the table and addressed the court. Your Honor, within this folder is the original trust established by Mr. Harlan Aldridge, verified by the First Coastal Bank and filed under federal registry. Included are the specific clauses that govern how the estate functions in the event of family dispute. He paused, flipping a page. Clause 9 states, Should any beneficiary take legal action against another beneficiary, all associated funds and properties shall be deemed encumbered by pre-existing tax and debt obligations, reverting ownership to the trust for liquidation. The courtroom shifted. The air changed. Even the hum of the ceiling fans seemed to stop. Arthur continued his tone firm but steady. In other words, Your Honor, my client's children, by filing this lawsuit, have triggered a clause that renders their own inheritance temporarily frozen, subject to legal review and financial penalties as outlined in the trust. Brielle's attorney slammed his palm on the table. That's absurd. No legitimate trust contains such a provision. Arthur didn't flinch. This one does. Signed, notarized, and witnessed by the bank's legal counsel. He turned the document around for the judge. Your Honor, you'll find Mr. Aldridge's signature and the verification stamp from First Coastal Bank on the final page. Silence stretched thin. The judge took her time reading. I could hear the faint tick of the courtroom clock, each second louder than the last. Finally, she set the papers down and looked over her glasses at the two faces I had once kissed goodnight. The court finds no evidence that Mrs. Aldridge is incapacitated, she said. Furthermore, this filing has activated the trust's protective clause. The accounts belonging to Mr. and Miss Aldridge will be held pending resolution of their tax obligations. The motion is denied. Arthur exhaled softly. I didn't move. I just sat there absorbing the weight of what had been said. Jet stood abruptly, his voice breaking through the still air. You knew all along. His words cracked with rage, but beneath it was fear. I met his eyes and spoke quietly, my tone steady. Your father knew. I only trusted him. The judge's gavel struck once sharp as thunder. Order. When it was over, I gathered my things without looking back. As I walked out, I could feel their anger burning behind me, hot and aimless like a fire that couldn't find fuel. Outside, the sky was pale and wide, the air thick, but moving now with a slow, cleansing wind. I stepped down the courthouse steps and paused, the sun spilling across the stone. For the first time since Harlan's death, my breath felt light. This wasn't victory. It was survival, the kind that doesn't need applause. Behind me, their voices faded into the hum of the street. Two figures walking away small against the bright afternoon. My children, my strangers. And yet somewhere deep beneath the ache, a quiet truth rose like a tide. I was still standing, and I was finally standing as myself. After the trial, the house exhaled. The silence that filled it wasn't the suffocating kind anymore. It was the kind that follows a storm when every sound feels cleaner, lighter. You could hear the wind slip through the magnolias again. You could hear the creak of old wood settling back into peace. A month passed. The headlines faded. The lawyers stopped calling. Jet sold his yacht trying to cover the tax penalties that kept multiplying. Brielle lost her house in Florida when the loans she'd taken out using the trust as collateral collapsed under review. They both vanished from Savannah quietly like shadows retreating from daylight. One evening, just after dusk, there was a knock at the door. The sound was hesitant, familiar. When I opened it, Brielle stood there. Her hair was tangled makeup, smudged clothes, rumpled. She looked smaller than I remembered. "Mother," she whispered, "I don't have anywhere to go." For a moment the years between us disappeared, and I saw her as she'd been a little girl with scraped knees and stubborn pride. I stepped aside. "Come in." She followed me to the kitchen where the air still held the scent of chamomile and wood smoke. I filled a bowl with soup, set it in front of her, and laid a folded blanket on the sofa. She ate in silence. When she finished, her voice cracked. "Is this forgiveness?" I shook my head. "No. This is mercy. Forgiveness is something you'll have to find on your own." She cried quietly the way people cry when they've already run out of excuses. When morning came, she was gone. The blanket was neatly folded, the bowl washed and set to dry. A week later, I sat across from Arthur again. His office felt warmer now, sunlight spilling across the same desk where Harlan's last letter had once sat. Arthur handed me the new will. "You're sure about this?" "Yes," I said. "Completely." He adjusted his glasses, reading aloud as I watched the light shift through the window. "To my children, Jet and Brielle. I leave the photographs, the letters and the memories of when love still guided them. To my grandson, Rowan Alderidge, I leave all remaining holdings, properties, accounts, and trust funds, along with the responsibility of preserving what our family once stood for: integrity, compassion, and truth." He looked up. "You've written it perfectly." When I signed, the pen didn't tremble. Outside, Savannah's autumn sun gleamed through the park trees, scattering gold on the pavement. It felt like something had finally aligned. That evening back home, Rowan was sweeping the porch. Leaves had started to fall crisp and red, collecting along the steps. He looked up as I came out. "Grandma," he said, smiling faintly, "do you ever regret any of it?" I watched the trees sway the air, soft and clear. "No," I said. Some things have to break before you know they were strong. We spent that night baking cinnamon bread, the scent drifting through the house the way it used to when Harlan was alive. Rowan asked questions about his grandfather, and I answered all of them, the real stories, not the ones money tells. When the timer rang, I opened the oven and laughed for the first time in months. Later, in the quiet of the living room, I took Harlan's journal from its place on the shelf. The last page waited for me, his words, steady even in death. "If one soul keeps kindness alive, the legacy endures." I closed the book and whispered, "One soul still does Harlan. He's right here." From the porch, I could hear Rowan humming softly as he stacked the cooled loaves. The air was thick with cinnamon and the faint rustle of magnolia leaves. The same trees that had watched me bury my husband, mourn my life, and reclaim both. I sat in the doorway, watching the golden light fade. No more shouting, no more laughter at my expense, just the quiet pulse of a house still breathing. People think inheritance is measured in dollars, I thought. But money is just a test, one most people fail. The real inheritance is truth, love, and the courage to carry both when it costs everything else. And I, the woman who was once left with only a box, had learned the secret Harlan meant for me to find all along. The key was never meant to open a safe. It was meant to open a heart.